Thanks for coming along. I'll be just sharing some learning experiences that I've had with Inertia JS and Phoenix. So as a bit of an outline of what I'm going to cover, what is Inertia JS for those of you who haven't come across it before, the user experience side of things, then the developer experience side of things, and then we can't have a talk about Elixir and Phoenix without the really cool bit, which is sockets and real-time. So I'll show you how we can get that integrated with the Inertia JS system. Okay, so what is Inertia? This is the spiel that they have on their own website. I won't read the whole thing out to you. You can read it at your leisure. But the highlighted portion is sort of the bit that gets a bit exciting. It has the front end frameworks that you like to use to make nice user experiences like React and Svelte and Vue.js. But you do not need to create an API to make it work. On the back end, you just write the controllers and use like you would do if you were building an MVC style app. It sort of comes out of the Laravel community originally, but you can use it with multiple backends. Yeah, so go check out their homepage if you want to learn more. Okay, and so Inertia JS is not so much a framework itself, but it does glue your front end and back end frameworks together to make them work seamlessly. Yeah, so you can use any of the sort of major big three front end frameworks, and they do have official support for Laravel, Rails, and Phoenix within their GitHub organization for different backend adapters. And there's adapters for just about any backend stack that you can imagine that are community supported. So I thought that was pretty cool, that a project that originated in the PHP world, yeah, allows Ruby and Elixir adapters to kind of be first-class citizens within their organization. That's pretty nice. Okay, so the core idea behind it is server-driven SPA. So unlike a traditional, and by traditional things like Create React app, SPAs that would use client-side routing to decide which page you're on and then make API requests to fetch data to show on those pages. And unlike traditional multi-page applications where you need to navigate to a new page by making a server request, and then that goes and fetches all the data and renders HTML back to the client, Inertia keeps the client-side portion of the SPA, so all the rendering happens client-side, but all of the routing and data fetching happens on the server side. So it's kind of an in-between. Okay, so to get a sense of roughly how it works, I'll just look at navigating between pages in an Inertia app. The user is going to click a link element on the page, and then rather than making a full web request, it'll make an XHR request from the browser using our special x-inertia true in a header. And then so on the back end, it can detect that, oh, this is an inertia request. And because the backend's aware of this, it can go off and handle that in a controller, go and fetch the data, and then importantly, respond just with JSON. So it doesn't need to render a full page, just the props that are required for the component that the front end needs to display. And then the client renders that component and using the given props and updates the browser history accordingly. So that's sort of the breakdown between what's responsibility of the front end and what's the responsibility of the back end. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense for it, but let's do a bit of a user experience demo. And so the app that I've been working on, it's a nice demo app because there's a million different implementations of it called Realworld. So you can go and check out their listing of all of the different implementations of the Realworld app. It's essentially a blog platform. So let's fire this up and see which browser window does it open in. I think this is the right one. Okay, actually, I want the other one. Yeah, I'll show you the logged out experience first. Okay, so you've still got my browser window being screen shared? Yeah, cool. Right, so this is the real world app. It's called Conduit. It's a place that lets you sign up for an account and make blog posts. You can see I've been doing a few here already. So we can do some basic stuff like browse around, follow some links, look at someone's profile, see it supports commenting. Let's sign up for an account. So we can see that we've got some nice form validation here. We need to actually fill out the form before we can proceed. Let's say this is Meetup, can be my username. Password 123, as is tradition. Okay, cool. And now we've signed up for an account. So you can do things like post an article. Let's see, we're going to call this one Meetups Are Fun. Go to more meetups because they are fun. Okay, and we've created an awesome article. Maybe I should use ChatGPT to flesh it out for me. But there we go. We've got something to go on there. So as you can see, it's kind of like a pretty standard React style app. But the main thing I wanted to highlight is it's got really fast page transitions. Like we're not seeing a big flash of white as we navigate between pages. I can hit the back button and it loads immediately. It doesn't even make a network request to go back. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of all the things that you would expect from a typical React app because it is a React app. Right, now back to the slides. Oh yeah, I didn't highlight it, but as we were navigating, we were seeing the URL update as we move between pages. Okay, yeah, so we get nice fast page updates because it's using client-side navigation, more swapping out the DOM content client-side, but we're still getting URL history and we can use the history API to go back. So another demo that I've been working on, which is more aligned with the sort of work that I've been doing lately with our clients at Alembic, was a hierarchical select. So let me show you that one. And this can be kind of annoying anytime you've got to do these sort of hierarchical selects. In this case, it's having to enter the details of your vehicle because you want to sign up for some new insurance, say. And in this case, you have to choose, okay, what year is it? Let's go all the way back to 2002. And once we've selected our year, we can then choose which model of vehicle we have. And so, you know, back in those days, the Australian brand Holden was still around, so we can choose them and then choose a model. And then the rest of the fields become unlocked at that point. We can choose our trim and our color and enter our mileage. And then if we decide, no, actually, it wasn't 2002, it was 2024, we need to reset all the fields and change the available selections. So in 2024, now we have Tesla available to select, and we can choose some fake data and put out here. But the main thing I wanted to highlight in this demo is how little network activity is required to achieve that. So let's see on the network tab, I'm going to clear that. And let's start by changing the year. So you can see I made a selection for year, and that went off and made a request to the backend. And the response was just the list of values that need to go into the makes dropdown. And then by selecting a make, it makes another request to the backend, but this time it only responded with the data required to fill out the next dropdown. So even though this is making requests to the same route that we're already on, it's using the features of Inertia to partially reload the props on the page. So that sort of minimizes the amount of data that needs to go back and forth. And also the backend can skip computing things that aren't going to be used on the front end or aren't needed. The other thing that's quite nice is for these other fields, we don't need to go to the backend. They're just local state. But unlike if you were using live view, making a change to your form fields doesn't need to go through a server round trip just to change some other state on the page. You can just use all your local state because it's right there in your browser because you're using React. So yeah, that's kind of a feel for what you can do by having, the nice client-side tools that are good for maintaining client-side state. Okay, so that's that little demo. Yeah, so in that one we showed we can do optimized partial page reloads where we only get back the props that we need. And we can maintain local state. We don't need to do network round trips over a WebSocket just to update the page. Okay, so that's sort of a sense of the user experience. Hopefully that gives you a flavor of what you can build with an Inertia app being basically whatever you would build with React, because that's how that's implemented for these demos. But what about on the development experience side? So in terms of tooling, you set this up in a Phoenix project, you get all the niceties like live reloads and code reloading. So you change your JavaScript and it immediately updates on the page. And if you make a request to the backend, it recompiles the code and uses the latest version. It's really quite nice to be back to just using plugs for things like authentication and authorization, because you can use your session for state. Unlike WebSocket-based frameworks, you kind of can't use that stuff. Navigation is pretty simple. On the client, you use links, and on the backend, you use redirects. And so it's really familiar if you've been doing MVC at all. Flash messages are supported. There's a nice hook for doing forms. You can map your errors onto those form fields really easily. Phoenix routes, test helpers. Yeah, there's a lot. But it's essentially just all the tools that you would get on any Phoenix project. They're all sort of there. But I think what's more important than the feature set of tools that you can use is kind of the vibe. And the experience when using it, to me, seems that it really steers you towards simple. Whereas if you go really heavy into like an SPA, you can land in a bit of complexity by taking on like big state management solutions like Redux, all the things, for example. And that becomes complex. Or if you go really heavy onto the server side and you end up having annoying user experiences because you don't have access to all the JavaScript that you would need to make it nice and interactive. But this seemed to steer me towards the simplest option is usually the right one, and that gave a good experience. There was helpful separation of the front end and back end. And I say that specifically helpful because it's not always helpful to stick an API in between things. But in this case, it was, you have to get the data you need on your back end and then serialize it to JSON, and then it's available to use on your front end, which means that there aren't ever cases where there's a sneaky update to your database lurking somewhere in a UI component, right? There is like a clear separation between the two. And that means that while you're working on your front end, you know that all you have to think about is displaying props. Like that's my only job right now. And when you're working on the back end, your only job is handling parameters and fetching data. And I found that separation quite helpful. And there are fewer moving parts versus having to create an API. You just get the props you need for the specific page that you're trying to show, pass them through, and then they get displayed. So having that really is a kind of pit of success sort of situation where you just do the simple, obvious thing and it's going to work. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of a speed run through what the code kind of feels like if you're maintaining it. I won't spend too much time on this, just give you a flavor of it. So you declare your routes just like you would in a typical Phoenix app. It's get, post, delete. You can use the resources macro if you like that as well. You pipe through plug pipelines to do your authentication or other middlewares that you might like to do. And so if you like being able to see all the routes at a glance, having them listed out in the router is pretty nice. Your controllers, they look kind of like regular old controllers. In this example, we're using Ash. So that's what this load and actor options are about. But in this case, we're loading up an article by its slug and getting some related data along the way. And if we found it, this is where it sort of differs a bit from typical Phoenix. Rather than using con.assign to assign things like values onto the con, we use this special function assign prop. And that's one that just makes those available to be JSON serialized down to the front end. I've come up with this convention for more complex things that need a bit more data mapping to go off and define a serializer module for them. I'll show you one of those in a sec. And then we call render inertia. Instead of, in normal Phoenix where you'd say render and then the name of the template, you just say render inertia and which page component should we use to render these props that we've just put on the con. So it should be, very similar to what you might have done in Phoenix MVC, but you just sort of change the functions that you're using to assign data and then render a view. And then, as you can see here, you just use your regular old put flash and redirect if you hit an error. Okay, domains. This is more of an Ash thing, but yeah, the way this one's been set up, we are declaring all the resources that are part of our domain. So in this case, it's articles, their tags, and the comments, and there's a few more. And here, this is what defines the code interfaces onto those actions that affect those resources. So there'll be a function that's created called get article by slug or list articles or so on. So that's how that works. That's kind of like the interface between the sort of database persisted entities and then the web layer. Okay, these serializers, this is just simple data mapping type code where we might have like a more complex resource struct that comes out of the database. But for the front end, we really just want to map it down to what are the essential fields that we need that we're about to show on the page right now. Especially if you're using Ash, which might have like not loaded calculations or relationships or things like that. We don't want that. Just pick off the strings and integers and other simple fields and stick them in a map. So that's what this code's doing. But these compose fairly nicely. So in this case, when we're serializing a comment to be sent to the front end, we might need to change the casing convention for created at and serialize the related user. But yeah, you can sort of compose them pretty easily. Okay, so what do the front end pages look like? This is sort of where the magic happens. You write your page component in a file in the pages directory of your assets folder, and you just declare the props that you would like to magically be handed when the page is rendered, and the server will give them to you. And that's it. They just come to you because that's what your controller assigned propped before it rendered. So you can kind of think of the life cycle of the page begins and it's already hydrated, ready to go with data. So that's really nice, writing the sort of page entry points into your app. It doesn't have to deal with empty states, loading states, error states, none of that. You just have the data ready to go. Really nice. Forms are, okay, this is a little bit boilerplatey. I think you could probably extract some patterns from this. But there's this use form hook, which you give it the initial values of all your form fields, and then a couple of functions, one to handle input events and one to handle the submit event. And it's sort of interacting directly with the usual event mechanisms where you have to prevent default to stop bubbling, but then you can update the data that is being tracked by the form or go off and submit it by posting it to an endpoint. And this little trick, preserve scroll true, lets you make changes to the page you're currently on, knowing that it's going to be redirected back to anyway, and preserve the scroll position. So it feels like you're not navigating away. So yeah, we'll see that in action in a sec. But then, yeah, once you've got those functions in place, you just wire them up to a plain old form and plain old text area inputs, and just have the onSubmit and onChange event handlers implemented, and you're good to go. So again, very simple, no big heavy framework stuff going on, just kind of markup and event handlers. Okay. So that's sort of the feel for it. But again, this is an Elixir group. You could have written that code in any framework. You could have used Rails. You could have used Laravel. What makes it more fun is when we use the things that Elixir and Phoenix are really good at, which is sockets and real-time communication. So let's see how the comment system works in this app. I need to create two windows. Got one of them set to private just so that they're not logged in as the same user. There we go. Okay, so, okay, looks like I'm logged in as two different users here. One's Mike and one's Meetup. Let's use the Meetup user to go and check out this article. It doesn't have any comments yet, so we can say, oh, let's make sure we're looking at it in both windows. Drop a comment on there. And hey, look at that. It appears on both screens. We can try from the other side. There we go. So that's cool. That's the sort of real-time stuff that people come to Elixir for. And getting this to work in the Inertia setup wasn't too tricky. Phoenix gives us the channels JavaScript client to sort of get started. And then the only difficulty was wrapping that up in a nice idiomatic React hook so that you can use it easily from a React frontend. I think we can have a quick look at how that works. I just switch back to my slides. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, so I think nowadays more people are probably familiar with using live view rather than the underlying channel system, but it is worth just exploring. You can even use the Phoenix generators to generate a channel and see how it all fits together. It's not too hard, but it's probably a little bit underplayed. You do have to go and see how it all works. So if you want to add a channel, usually you'll have something like user socket already in there from your Phoenix generator. And then so you're declaring a new channel to be handled by that socket. I've taken a shortcut here and not using an authentication token. You should use that. Don't follow my example. And then within that channel, it's got a bit of a life cycle. First, you join the channel, and when you do that, that's your chance to subscribe to different topics. So in particular, in this case, we're using Phoenix PubSub to subscribe to comment created topics for the particular article that we're currently looking at, and comment destroyed on that article. And then so that's going to use the Phoenix PubSub machinery and listen for broadcasts that are coming in on those topics. And then we just have to write a couple of little event handlers for those. So we're going to pattern match on comment created being the topic. And then we pull off the payload data off of that message and then use the push function to send it down the socket to the front end with a nice serialized representation of the data. And same thing if one's destroyed. We can still get the thing that was just deleted and then send it down to the front end so the front end can remove it from the list. Okay, sorry for the wall of code here. This is a custom hook that wraps the useChannel hook, and it uses a reducer style abstraction to maintain state locally on the client based on the stream of events that are coming from the server. So in this case, we set up our topic being comments on the article that we're looking at. We create a reducer function that takes some initial state, which is the list of comments that were already there when we rendered the page, and handles the next message that's coming in from the socket. And if the message's event is comment created or comment destroyed, we update our comments state accordingly. Otherwise, we just return it unchanged. So with those two things, we can use our useChannel hook to get the comment state and return that out. So yeah, this is pretty simple once you understand the pattern that it's using a reducer to maintain state. and using that as the way that we integrate with channels. But then once you have that, you can drop that in on any component that just wants to have the current latest list of comments. And it's a nice little simple hook. And then from that point on, you just flow it through like a prop. So I was really happy with the way that landed. Yeah, it means that all the details are tucked away in hooks and nicely layered. And then for the UI purposes, we just say, give us our comments. And I think that might be all of the planned content I have. I can just show you the delete working. There we go. Yeah, so time for some questions, or I'd love to hear if anyone else has experience using Inertia and what they thought of it, or other similar technologies. Like I'm interested in HTMX and others that allow you to kind of use that mix of server side and client side.